Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. It is that time of month again. It is time for the Freeform. Yeah. So this month has been a long one, huh? Because we've had the ACME deep dive going. 3 episodes all in a row. And on one level, I'll say that was a lot of fun. We got to cover a lot of stuff in those deep dives. And from a content creation perspective, I didn't have to come up with new topics so much. I kind of knew in advance what I was doing. On the other hand, it was the same thing for 3 weeks, just different facets of the same thing. So, it was a lot of fun. If there are other deep dives that we want to examine in future, I'm 100% open to that. But I'm also okay with there being a little bit of a change, and we're done with that for now, and maybe we'll have more to cover on it in future. Who knows? So, here we are. I said if people had comments to let me hear them, and I appreciate the comments that have come in. There haven't been any comments saying that they hated it, so that's a plus. And while I realized that the last episode was kind of Windows centric, it did not seem to be a problem as far as people were concerned. Just not perhaps as applicable to people running other operating systems. And that's okay. That's 100% okay. I'm glad that people were able to get something out of the other episodes and learn more about the implementation side in terms of details, even if it was not directly applicable to their OS of choice. Cool. So other than that, what am I talking about today in this Freeform? Am I just blathering for 20 minutes? Yes, I'm probably blathering for 20 minutes, but I do actually have something to talk about. And this is a term that you may have heard other network admins use, or you may have heard your local IT person mention in passing. That word is e-waste. What is e-waste? Broadly speaking, e-waste can be understood as any sort of electronics waste whatsoever, whether that's stereo systems, toasters, kettles, computers, switches, routers, all of it. But when an IT person is using it, we're probably not talking about the stereo system or the TV, unless it's a smart TV. Fine. But e-waste is not something that you should be throwing in the trash. And so usually what an admin will do is end up recycling it somehow. There are dedicated electronics recycling shops. Sometimes, depending on your municipality, there may be an electronics return program, similar to like a bottle depot. You may also have other freestanding associations. In our area, we've got the Electronics Recycling Association as an example. And that may be an option for you as well. But however you do it, recycling is a good idea for this. Which leads to a different thing altogether. The practice of e-waste, not as a noun, but as a verb. You may hear an admin or your IT person say, oh yes, I'm e-wasting that. Okay, what is this? Broadly speaking, again, we're talking about electronics waste, but the verb, as you might expect, is just the process of sending something to e-waste. And particularly when admins use this phrase, a lot of the times they may be indicating that they are intending to recycle this through a standard electronics recycling stream. They may also be recycling this by bringing it into a home lab or another context of that sort. Is this ethical? Generally speaking, I would say yes, within limits. What are these limits? Well, obviously, our responsibility as admins is not to take equipment that still has a use, but there is a lot of equipment that genuinely does not meet business purposes anymore. It's older, it's slower, it doesn't have the features necessary for continued use in the corporate environment that it is needed in. Okay, this is just the way that things go. But just because it no longer meets business requirements for that specific context doesn't mean that it is useless in another context. But another rejoinder to that would be, well, maybe we could resell it. Maybe we could sell it to somebody. Maybe. But the honest truth of it is, that's a lot of effort in and of itself. If you are a large corporation, you may have some sort of outlet for seconds or for used equipment or however else you deal with that. I know that these exist. However, for most small to medium businesses, the effort of going through a proper disposal stream, you have to make sure that the disks have been cleared. You need to make sure there's no confidential data left over. You need to make sure that you've got proper recording of the sales, any taxes that were needed, and then you have to put it through the accounting books. And all of this requires paying for people's time as well. There's a lot of effort that goes into that. And so for many small and medium businesses, it's easier to just say it's already been written off. It's been written off out of the books, and it's easier to deal with it that way. Okay, that's a valid business decision. Where that takes place, where that is the case, there is space for an admin to bring that into a home lab context or use it in another fashion. Not for a business, but typically speaking, if an admin is going to take charge of equipment in this manner and recycle it through a proper recycling process and then back into their own use, the admin also knows enough to make sure that any confidential company data is erased, the equipment is secured, and a lot of the times they're also the best placed person to do this. If they are recycling it, they know what needs to happen, and you don't need to go through the additional certification process of have the discs been wiped, has this, has that, has the other thing. If you're a business that is big enough to do this, it's a good thing to do. There's no harm in having a checklist. None whatsoever. But for small or medium businesses, maybe not so interesting. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Long time ago, like, I gotta say 17, 18 years ago now at this point, thereabouts, when I was a co-op student working a co-op job, one of the tasks that I had to perform was recycling equipment. This was really old equipment, like Pentium 2s, Pentium 3s, that age of equipment. And they were old desktops. They had a hard life working in a lumber mill. They were full of wood dust and sawdust and everything else. They were not going to be going anywhere. They had to be recycled. So I asked, permission is also a wonderful thing to get for this kind of thing. I said, okay, if I am taking this and I am recycling it, Does the business care what happens to it after it is taken to recycling? And they said, no, we don't care whatsoever. It needs to be taken out of the mills. It needs to be taken out of where it is. It needs to go to recycling. If, one or two pieces of equipment is of use for some reason, then by all means, we don't care and we don't need to know anything further about it. Okay. Where you have permission like that, that makes things really, really easy, and there's no conflict there whatsoever. We're not removing equipment that still has a business use. It's been shut down, it's old, there is no use for it. It's going to an electronics recycler, or it's finding a new home elsewhere. That's the end of the story. To some extent, the same is true for other larger equipment, servers, switches, routers, etc. As long as it has a use for the business, we're going to keep it there. We're going to make sure that it is still working and still functioning as long as we can. If it no longer has a business need, if it no longer meets requirements, I need at least a gigabit network, this switch only does 100 megabit, then you got to replace the switch. That doesn't mean that the old 100 megabit switch has stopped working, but it does mean that it no longer works for this business's needs. And in this fashion, you can get a lot of e-wasted equipment that looks and to some extent performs just as well as it did a month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago. It just no longer meets the needs for that business, and it's not worth the business's time or effort to go through the full security cleaning, reselling, tax documentation, and all the rest of that work. So it just gets written off. Admins can populate a pretty decent home lab if they happen to work for businesses or in an area that allows them to recover some of this validly, ethically e-wasted equipment. Again, I'm emphasizing the ethically part because there are some customers, for example, I have another customer that I'm working with, they just replaced a server. And they're like, we really have a tendency to hang on to things until they're of absolutely no use. I'm like, this server has no use for you. You're not going to be doing anything else with it. If you're going to be creating any new services or anything else, you're going to be putting that on your new server where it's still reliable hardware. You could keep this as a lab or a test environment. That's absolutely an option. And the customer went, okay, well, I guess we don't need it, but I want to make sure that it's not going to go to any other business. I want to make sure the disks are wiped and everything else, and we really want to make sure it's not being used or resold to anybody else. Perfectly within their rights. I said, okay, we'll bring it back to my office. I will personally make sure that the disks are wiped. And I did that, and I forwarded them the information. I said, okay, here's what I've been able to accomplish. The disks are wiped as much as they can be. It will now wait for electronics recycling. And it's still waiting. We collect enough electronics recycling to have a pickup done roughly about every year or so, give or take. We only had that, we had them stop by like 2 months or so before we took this server. And so the customer has continued to check in and go, hey, I want to know, has it been recycled yet? Has it been recycled yet? And the answer is, it hasn't been recycled yet. It is still in storage. It is not being used. It is not going anywhere else. You have asked for this to go straight to recycling and not to be reused or resold. Do I understand why they're so keen on making sure that it doesn't get used by anybody else? I really don't. I mean, the data has been destroyed, the disks have been wiped. We've made sure that it's not going to be a problem. There's none of their data left over, nothing can be recovered from it. Okay, fine. Do I understand why then they're so keen to make sure that nobody else can use anything to do with the server, even if they bought new hard drives or anything else? I don't understand that. But that is within their right. And so I honor that request. I have to, ethically. It will go to recycling. It will not go to a home lab. It will not go to any other customer. It will not be used in emergencies. It's off the table. So there are definitely companies that feel that way about their equipment. If we can't use this anymore, nobody else should be able to use it either. I can't argue that. It's their equipment. They get to call the shots on that. But if you can get past that, there's benefits to allowing your admins to use old equipment. Because if you have that in your home lab, if you have that in a test environment, if you have that elsewhere, even if it's not in the workplace, because funnily enough, when you're in the workplace, you're kind of expected to be doing work stuff. And a lot of companies don't have time for, oh yeah, absolutely, take a full day every week just to play around and experiment with things that have nothing to do with any business request whatsoever. Most companies don't have that kind of flexibility. They really don't. So an admin will continue to experiment with things and play with things, but they'll do it at home on their own time or as a hobby. Let them do that. If they can do that with your old equipment that genuinely does not serve a business purpose anymore, that's a win for everybody. That's a win for the admin who gets to better their skills and gets to play around with enterprise equipment in a context where screwing up doesn't mean that you've brought the business to its knees. If you screw up at home, it's just your home that you have to worry about. That's a lot less stressful. I speak from experience. It's a benefit for the company that gets to reap the benefits of the admin's increased knowledge, confidence, familiarity with the equipment, because they've gone and acquired that knowledge, and then they get to bring that into the business environment. And it's a benefit from an environmental perspective as well. The longer you can extend the useful life of a piece of equipment that took quite a bit of doing to manufacture, that's a win all around. It will eventually still go into the recycling stream. Hopefully, precious metals will be reused and everything will be disposed of as well as it can be. But increasing the useful lifespan of the equipment as much as possible, even if that lifespan is not in the business world, is a benefit. It's a win all around. For admins, then, how do we do this properly? Can you just say, oh, well, the company's getting rid of it, so that means I can just take it? Probably not. You probably want to at least check in with somebody and make sure that the company doesn't have policies similar to the customer I mentioned, where if they can't use it, it has to go for destruction. It cannot be used by anybody else. If you don't ask, you don't know if that's the case. And lack of knowing is rarely sufficient excuse to get out of a problem if one exists in future. So it's better to check first, like I did with my co-op job. Hey, do you care what happens to this after it gets recycled? No, and we don't need to hear about it. Perfect. Then there's no worries whatsoever. And if there are reservations, then you can explain to them, I'm not taking this to sell it on eBay and try to make a few bucks, because that's, if there were bucks to be made, pretty good bet the business wants to be the one making the bucks. So I'm not taking this to resell it. I'm not taking this to, try and live large. I want to take this to develop my skills. I want to set up a test environment. I want to use this to develop my skills and increase my knowledge outside of the workplace, because I'm busy while I'm at work. I've got a bunch of stuff to do to help you guys. So if I want to improve myself on my own time, I need some equipment to be able to do that. There are arguments that you can bring to the table, and that might be persuasive. If it is, good. Go ahead. It's something that is a normal and natural, at least to me, part of the life cycle of this equipment. You just have to make sure you check first to make sure it's okay. And hopefully businesses that you talk to will be able to understand that this is a net benefit to them as well. That's pretty much everything, I think, that I'm going to talk about today. The last video was kind of long, so this one can be a little shorter. That's okay. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you have any suggestions for things that you'd like to see me talk about in future, or topics you'd like me to discuss, whether that's a multi-part deep dive or whether that's just something that, a one-off that you'd like to hear about, if you have something like that, let me know. The comments are open. So, for now, thank you again. I am your next door net admin, and we'll see you next time.